Hi. Today we're going to take a look back at your presentations, and we are going to be looking at. I'm actually going to wait for a bit because it seems there's nobody watching yet. Yeah, Karma, 0 viewers. 0 viewers. Sem začel govoriti? Čakaj, sem dal na tiho. Hi, so I think we're ready to begin now. So what we're going to be talking about today, again, is our pitches. However, we're going to take a slightly different perspective to them than you were used to. We're going to be talking about two stories that you're going to be telling your investors. One being the founder story, which is your, let's call it in a way, personal story as to how this startup came to be as an alternative to the user story. And then secondly, we'll be talking about the story of your company. So your company story. And I think it's best if we just dig in. Now, firstly, let's just briefly revise. This is the pyramid that we've seen a couple of times. This is how your pitch should be structured, right? You begin with your purpose, you then move on to the problem and solution, you move on to why now, the market and the competition, the product, the business model, the team, and finances. In this order, and with these slides, you are guaranteed to say everything that needs to be said in front of an investor. Now, let's begin by talking about teams. And startups are usually, if not always, formed by teams. And there's a couple of things that we should consider when we think about what makes a good startup team. Now, firstly, we believe that diversity is key. We'd like to say at Hakoning that you need 3 types of people: hackers, hustlers, and hipsters. Hackers being, let's call them the technical types, so the hardcore programmers, the hardware guys, the bioinformaticists who are actually in the dirt digging and actually making the product work as is promised. Then you're going to need a hustler, which is basically the business person, the one who's going to constantly be looking for a deal, the person who's constantly going to try to figure out how to make the company profitable and to bring the product to the market. And then lastly, you're going to need the people who are going to be concerned with the actual look and feel of the product, with the way people are going to interact with them. You would call them designers, user experience experts. If you want to use buzzwords, at Hekonic, we just call them hipsters. So at the end of the day, if you don't have one of each in your team, you probably might want to start thinking about expanding, because you're going to have a very, very bad time trying to get to the level of success you imagine right now without covering all your bases. Now, the optimum number of people for a core team, so let's call them a team of founders, is 2 to 4. Nobody should ever do it alone. Some incubators even make a statement out of not accepting any startups with a single founder, because to be honest and to be completely realistic, the stress of the startup life is just very, very, very high, and it is very unlikely a single person is able to handle it without having at least a couple of very close people who run the thing with them. Now, we usually divide the team into 3 different levels: founders, the people who are actually at the startup from the beginning, so the people who created it; then the team, the people that actually works on the product, the people that design the product, the people that code the code that runs it, the people that deal with the hardware issues; and then you have the staff, or let's call them the support staff, which are all the people that you need for a company to be able to work, but they aren't directly influencing the product that you're working on. Now, there's this mantra right now going across Silicon Valley and even across the world that you should only ever hire A players. And while it is very hard to disagree with this, I feel that it is important to consider the fact that people's performance largely depends on the context in which they find themselves in. So an A player in one company might not even perform on a B or on a C level in a different one, because of the context they are put in, because of the company's culture, or because of a different set of circumstances. So in hiring, you shouldn't only be looking for people who look like A players on paper, which means people with the biggest and badassest CVs, but you should look for people who you are going to enable to become A players and to actually perform as such. And this brings us to another very important point of what are the things in a team. And this is culture. Now, we could define culture as all the values that a company holds that manage their interpersonal and day-to-day relations in the company, and it is becoming incredibly, incredibly more important. Right? It is a set of behaviors that people adopt, and it is a set of rules that people have to follow. Now, we all know that Silicon Valley has a great problem with sexism, but it's great to see that they're trying to fix it. For instance, now Apple is following Facebook's steps in allowing their female employees, in paying for their female employees freezing of their eggs if they wish to do so. And while this activity has absolutely nothing to do directly with the success of the company, these huge corporations have figured out that it is very important that they consider the contextual situation that their employees find themselves in, and to develop a culture that's going to be accepting for all. Now, teams should always work on their commitment. If you want team members that are going to be performing and that are going to be reliable, they need to commit to the startup. Now, this becomes a problem if you're going to be hiring new people, and because you don't have enough cash, you want to offer them stock options, because if you give the people their stocks on day one of their work, they have very, very little incentive to stay at this startup. Instead, they could just quit, keep their shares, and keep bathing in the money that you're going to earn with your own work. That's why there's a trick that's being used. We probably shouldn't call it a trick. It's actually standard practice, and it's called reverse vesting, which means that usually as you're going to promise someone, let's say 5% of stock options, you're not going to give them those full 5% on day one, but you're going to set a timeline with saying if they're going to be working here for 6 months, they're going to get 2%. If they're going to work here for a year, they're going to get 3%. For 2 years, they're going to finally get 5%. So that people have a vested interest in staying. Now, the saying hire fast, fire faster is very, very true. However, let's consider two specific levels of this saying. The first one being hire fast. What do we mean by that? That you should hire based on your gut feeling, not because your gut feeling is absolutely always right, but because your gut feeling determines a lot of things when it comes to how you're going to feel around the people that you're going to be hiring. And if you don't feel well around someone in their interview, the chances of you enjoying their company later on are going to be very, very, very slim, and it's going to lead to an unproductive and sad relationship for everyone. So in that sense, whenever things go bad, you should also hire even faster than you've hired someone. Now, let's consider our founder story. If you're going to remember the presentation where we talked about the user story, you're going to see that these two overlap. Even the founder story has a purpose, a problem, and a solution. However, the difference here is that instead of giving us a user and what that user might be experiencing, if the story or if the motivation for you doing this product aligns with your users, if you're eating your own dog food, if you are the main user of your app, then this might make sense to transform it into a founder story. Now, how do you figure out if your founder story is a good idea or not? Here's a tool that might help you. You should consider your vision, your mission, your values, and your goals. Now, your vision effectively is the vision of the world that you would like to live in. How is the world going to look like when you'll be successful? Right? What's going to happen at the point where you're going to say, now we've achieved what we wanted to achieve? How does the world look like then? You then go on to consider your mission and your purpose, which is where you ask two questions, two why questions. The first one being, why are we doing this? We as the founders, what are your internal motivations for doing these things? Right? Without these types of motivations, you're not going to succeed. You need to analyze them and figure out what they are. The second question is, why are people buying this? And the answer to these two questions are often going to be misaligned. However, if they are effectively the same, this is a signal to you that insofar as your user story and your pitch is concerned, it might be a good idea to try to switch it with the founder story. But you need to be honest in this. If your reasons why you're working in this startup aren't the same as your users buying your stuff, then you should probably stick with your user story. Now, how does a team become? There's a couple of things in play here. Firstly, every team needs motivation. The motivation is either something abstract like we're going to change the world, or something that we're going to build the best product, or it might be something completely different. But at the end of the day, it is absolutely true that teams need motivation and that you need to figure out what your exact motivation is. Secondly, teams need imagination. And this term imagination here isn't used in that very, very artsy way where we call people who are imaginative the people who come up with pictures of dragons and fairies and everything else. The imagination that we're talking about here is the imagination of being able to envision the world that you're going to create. So how is this world going to look in the future? If your co-founders or if your team members are going to lose this image in front of their eyes, they're not going to be motivated anymore. So that means that as well as you should pitch investors, you should also be pitching your co-founders more than 50% of the time because they need to stay motivated. You as a company need to keep that vision clear. Now, lastly, there's a set of team building processes that make a team come true. And firstly, you have culture, which then gives birth to some rules that define behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable, which in the end result in death and in firing. Why is this important? It is important because when you fire someone, this isn't going to only affect the person who lost their job. It isn't only going to affect them and you, the person who had to go through the ordeal of firing them, but it's going to leave a lasting impact on the whole of your team. And you need to figure out what that lasting impact will be and then work with your team to overcome these hurdles when they happen. Now, after your team has become, it's time to move on to execution. There's two things you're going to need for that. First is discipline. You're going to need to define rules and behavior, and you're going to need to sharpen your culture. There's going to be more explicit rules as to what is allowed and what isn't. Secondly, though, you need to ensure visibility and transparency. Not only in the sense that you should be open about what you're doing because that's the nice thing to do, but because visibility and transparency are greatly going to contribute to your team's motivation based on what we talked about in the previous slide when we were talking about how you should focus on imagination and pitch your co-founders more than 50% of the time. Now, the second thing that your team is going to need is focus. And focus, as Steve Jobs said, is all about saying no. So there's going to be a ton of ideas that are going to be coming your way. There's going to be options for you to do this feature, that feature. You're going to get customers coming and saying, oh, please, can we do this? Can we do that? This would have been awesome. And much more important than saying yes in this case is going to be for you to say no. Right? You need to realize which of the things you have that you shouldn't be focusing on. Now, lastly, those two things are going to come together in execution. And in order for you to sustain your execution, you need a management loop with defined metrics, which you are going to be able to use in order to keep control over what's going on. Now, when we talk about management, a lot of people seem to think that this is going to mean that you're going to be very bitchy to your employees, that everyone's life is going to be horrible now. And it doesn't have to be that way. That effectively is a false choice. It is absolutely true that you should leave your people to unwind, that you should trust them with their own management of their productive time, etc. But at the end of the day, if you want to make consistent decisions for the future of your company, you're going to need to have some numbers on the basis of which you're going to be able to make those decisions. You're going to have to figure out what works and what doesn't. And the only way, unfortunately, to do that is to keep tracking what everyone in the company does, including you and the CEO and everyone else in any type of position on the company. This doesn't only apply to your subordinates. Now, there's currently this debate going on, the intuitive versus the analytical approach. And this debate is presented in such a way as if saying, oh, way back when in the dark ages, management was intuitive, and today in the Enlightenment stage, it's analytical and we know everything. However, this is a false choice again. While you should be testing your hypotheses all the time, and it is absolutely true that wrong assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups, but at the end of the day, as you're going to open your Excel spreadsheet with all the data that you've collected, your intuition is still going to guide you to decide to calculate one factor, the other factor, to ask this question or that question about this set of this set of pieces of information. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to be honing both of these skills, the intuitive managerial part as well as the analytical approach, in order to confirm your, or sorry, not confirm, but to actually disprove your hypotheses. There's no way you can confirm one. Okay, now let's move on to your company story. There's 4 things that you're going to be talking about here. The first one is the product, the second one is the business model, the third one is the team, and the last one are the finances that we'll talk about at a later workshop. So let's dig right into it. What is your job as a team? You have to build a system that's going to be able to produce products that you're going to be selling. There's going to be a couple of cycles that you're going to have. The first one, the core cycle, is going to effectively be you measure something, you build something new, and then you learn from that. So you set up a hypothesis, you measure the response to those, you then build a new version of the product, you learn, and then again you measure, you build, you learn, and you keep on iterating that in much the same way as we talked about at lecture 1 when we talked about the finding your product market fit. There's 3 things you need to focus on. The first one is speed. So things need to be happening fast. As a small and agile team, your absolute greatest, if not only advantage against an incumbent on the market, against a big company that is already there, is for you to move fast, faster than they are. Right? Remember Facebook saying, move fast and break things? There's a new company now, which I don't remember who said that, but their tagline supposedly is move fast without breaking things. And while I do enjoy the fact that they've moved away from breaking things, speed still remains one of the main drivers of how companies view their path to success. Secondly, you should be learning all the time. Everything that happens in your startup is a learning lesson. And lastly, you should keep on focusing by saying no, no, no to several things, to new features, to things that aren't directly necessary for your product. There's a couple of holy grails that you want to achieve at one point, which is basically you having a daily loop, so knowing what's happening on a daily basis, what needs to happen tomorrow, are you running late with anything, a sort of a weekly loop, what short-term planning, a monthly loop, quarterly, and then yearly cycles. Now, at the end of the day, these are going to be tailored to different requirements. Of course, the yearly loop isn't going to be as detailed as the daily one, and all of these serve different purposes. The daily one being more of a crisis management tool, the weekly one being more of a like, let's check if we're all on the same page, the monthly one and quarterly ones and yearly ones, planning and evaluating. Now, again, you're going to have to use some tactics with your scientific approach of disproving hypotheses. But as we already said, the intuition versus analytical debate doesn't really stand ground here. Now, you're going to approach a word that we've already seen a couple of times. The word is metrics. What are metrics? Metrics are effectively numbers that measure something that is important to you, right? They aren't just any piece of data, but they are pieces of information that are going to allow you to make reasonable and consistent decisions about your startup. Now, you have to first define what is important. And here you should steer away from vanity metrics, right? Stuff like how many people viewed your website, whereas you should be probably measuring how many people signed up, or the percentage of people who viewed the website and then signed up or didn't sign up. So you have to consider those metrics that are actually going to tell you something about your company. And as a shorthand, you could say that if your metrics don't hurt, you're doing it wrong. Secondly, you're going to want to measure two things. Firstly, activities, the things that you do, and then secondly, your projects or your products, the things that you're working on. You should set company, area, and personal KPIs. These are key performance indicators. Out of the metrics that you have, you're going to pick out a few that are going to be a subset of the things that you need to know about a person in order to be able to tell them whether or not they're improving, stagnating, or actually doing worse in a certain period of time. Lastly, never send a human being to do a computer's job. Please automate as many things as possible. There are so many tools and APIs right now, and export options and conversions. So there's absolutely no excuse of you spending time clicking mindlessly, copying things from one cell to another. Now let's go on to the presentation at hand. We're going to look at a couple of things. Firstly, we're going to look at the purpose slide again, and we're going to look at the Dressrush slide that we already looked at one point. And here's what Dressrush says. Dressrush says we are changing the way people shop for weddings. And the reason we're looking at this slide again is because I feel that you didn't quite understand what the purpose slide should be. Now I want us to analyze this deck very briefly to maybe give you a better understanding of how you should go about that. Now, what Dressrush says here is we are changing the way people shop for weddings. Right? They've decided that there's already one thing that people do, and they are going to change it for the better. Secondly, consider the use of tense in this purpose. What they're using here is the present continuous, which is a tense that in English signifies that something has been happening before, is happening right now, and will be happening in the future, in the short term. Right? They are doing this now already. The fruits of their labor are already visible, and there will be more fruits in the future. Right? Now, consider the way they form the second half of this tagline or of this purpose. Right? They say we are changing the way people shop for weddings. Okay? Now, consider the focus here on shopping, which means that Dressrush is focusing on the shopping experience. They aren't talking about prices. They aren't positioning themselves as something that's going to be cheaper. They don't position themselves as something that's going to be vastly different. They are improving the experience of shopping for weddings, right? They are describing as an action that users take every single day, and they're going to tell us how they make it better. Now let's move on to the more interesting slides, the slides that we talked about today extensively, right? So the slides that we do have to look at now, the product slide, the business model slide, and so on. So firstly, let's take a look at the product slide. What we're looking at now is, again, I feel a failed startup, but I feel this product slide is very, very cool Now, please keep in mind that this is a presentation that was designed for reading, not for pitching. So the text is way too small, and there's too much of these squares on this side for a pitch that's going to be oral. So you might want to, if you have a situation like this, break it down into 2 slides. Now, the reason I feel this is a very, very good demonstration of how to do a product presentation is because they aren't explaining the features of the product. They aren't giving you the stuff that is in there. They are telling you what the user experience of every type of interaction is going to be. So firstly, they have this newsfeed type of thingy, or your wall in a way, and they don't call it the wall. They say, this is a place for all your dreams. Run a marathon, go on a road trip, learn to speak Spanish, travel the world, get in better shape, focus on what matters. Or for instance, on the bottom, this is a camera feature, and it's just a camera feature, but they don't say users can take a photo here, or this is a camera. What they say is, beautifully captured your journey. Weave together all the steps, moments, lessons, and people who inspired you along the way. And I feel that this is a very, very good lesson in how you should be designing your product slide, because it shouldn't only be about the technical specifications of your app or the features that are present in your app. You should always be talking about what your users are going to be doing at different points in time. Okay, we'll move on to the business model. And what we're going to take a look at here is the business model slide, again from DressRush. And I feel that this is one of the best ways to actually present a business model. I feel that they've done a terrific job. So let's just go right into it and take a look at it. So what do they tell us here? They basically give us a whole picture of what happens when money comes in and when money goes out. And they say, firstly, we pay Facebook and Google, both advertisers, about 17 cents every time a person clicks on an ad. Now, we have a 31% conversion rate on those ads, which means it costs us 55 cents to acquire a customer. Now, the average customer length is 7.7 months, which means that the long-term customer value that we get is 5 to 7 times the cost to acquire them. And then they move on and put this into perspective. They say, here, let's say we want to acquire 1,000 customers. We're going to spend $550. Out of those $550, we are going to get $2,750 up to $3,850 from 1,000 customers. And out of these 2 slides, absolutely everything is clear to us. We know where the money goes in, we know where the money goes out, we know what's going to be happening to the money, and we're absolutely able to understand how the business model looks like. So as you're going to be explaining your business model, please keep in mind that you present it as a system, as an engine even. You have to present us what the process is of where the money goes in or where the money goes out. Not only tell us that you're going to be charging X for something that you do. Okay, now let's take a look at the team slide, because also I feel that you've all been neglecting your team slide, even though these are very, very, very important. So we're going to take a look at another example that I feel is very, very nice. This is an example from the presentation by Speakeasy. And this presentation, I don't know if you remember, in workshop 1, we took a look at their solution slides. Now here's their team slide. And again, this is a presentation for reading. So you might want to increase the text and maybe make the picture smaller and just the heads on your oral pitch presentation. But still, I feel there are a lot of lessons that we could learn from here. So let's take a look. So this team is comprised of 2 people. We've got Kevin and Anthony. And in the top left corner of each and every picture, we see what their role is. So Kevin here is responsible for marketing, and Anthony is responsible for development. And I'm sure they've both led tremendously interesting lives. I'm sure that they've both led tremendously interesting lives, but at the end of the day, they aren't giving us all the information that they would want. They aren't telling us where they graduated. They aren't telling us where they went to school. They just give us 2 bullet points, and let's take a look at what they are. Kevin tells us, I founded New Mindspace, which is a startup that most investors that they were pitching would know. And secondly, he said, I created the International Pillow Fight Day, which is celebrated in over 150 cities around the world. And Kevin, I'm sure, has a lot of other successes, but in order for him to convince us that he would be a good marketing manager, right, he needs to give us these two things, and we trust that he can do the job. And that's all we need to know, but those two examples need to be picked very, very carefully. The same goes for Anthony, the developer. He says, I've been a designer and developer for over 10 years. I've been a founder of Peace Love Human. I've been on the founding team of Metro, has worked with the New York and Silicon Valley startups, including Splice, Sustainly, and Arrive, which the investors are going to know. And all of these startups were actually a pretty big deal. So we know that he's got 10 years of experience, and we know that he can probably handle the development side of their app. Now, this has been a brief overview of those two things. We are going to deal with the financial slide at a later point, but now I invite you to meet me at the Google Hangouts link that you should be able to see. If not, I will paste it also to the Facebook group and make sure that I see you there. See you soon.